on the world map is Narain Karthikeyan. We are very, very proud of him as citizens of the city, but I'm sure every Indian who likes sport knows the honor that Narain Karthikeyan brought to India by being the first Formula 1 driver. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for Narain. Belongs to a family that has built Coimbatore in many ways. The flag, Jana Gana. Big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for Narain. Narain, we want to hear you now.
Doctors, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, thank you everyone. It's absolutely fantastic being amongst you all this morning. My profession, my sport and your profession have a lot in common, and teamwork being the most evident, I suppose. Well, as a professional sportsman from our country, my story is pretty unique. Against all odds, I reached the pinnacle of my discipline, the Formula 1 World Championship. Well, it's a story of making the impossible possible, I suppose. As a child, it's easy to have dreams without understanding the magnitude of those aspirations. But I was determined to succeed, and nothing was going to stand in my way. It was because of this intense focus and single-minded approach that I succeeded in achieving my dreams. It was a time when motorsport was virtually non-existent, I would say. In fact, it was only a year ago that our government recognized it as a sport. Well, I come from Coimbatore, and in the early 90s, whilst I was growing up, it was very much a textile and an engineering hub, and nothing much more else to do. Well, because of the engineering background, the folks back at home in Coimbatore were always keen to modify the cars and race them whenever the opportunity arose. As a child, I grew up in this environment, and this culture was embedded deep in my DNA. My father is a former rally champion and has always been a huge inspiration to me. That's how my obsession with motorsport really started off. I did my schooling at the Saints Higher Secondary School in Coimbatore, and until the 7th grade, I was a pretty average student, I would say. Well, after this, one of my teachers, I remember quite evidently, one of my teachers called me up one day and said, you know, you seem to be outstanding outside the class. Please put the same effort inside. So I was, as I said earlier, you know, the focus was so intense, and the passion to succeed was quite high as well. But it was only in the late 80s, early 90s, that's when I got hooked on to Formula 1. My first memories are of seeing the great late Ayrton Senna race. And, from then on, I drew a lot of parallels between Brazil and India. And both were developing countries, and I thought, so many Brazilians have gone on to be and gone on to Formula 1 and been successful at that. So here I am, a 12-year-old, from India, from Coimbatore, saying, yes, I'll go, capture the world of motorsport and be the first Indian Formula 1 driver. Well, and that, over the years, I became the Formula Asia champion, then went on to England to race in the British Formula 3 Championship, and won races there. Drove with the likes of Jenson Button, who also drove with me in Formula 3 in England, and then I qualified to get a super license, which you require to drive in Formula 1. And in 2005, I made my dream come true and represented India in the Formula 1 World Championship with the Team Jordan. And the first race was in Australia at the Melbourne Grand Prix. And, I had to pinch myself to say that, you're racing against your heroes like Michael Schumacher and so on. So it was a fantastic feeling, and for the whole motorsport fraternity, it was a proud moment, I suppose. Well, Formula 1 is a sport, but it is as technically demanding as building a space rocket. Lots of aerospace technology and Formula 1, they share a common platform. The team, everyone from housekeeping staff to a top drawer aerodynamist, plays a key part in the team's performance and in the outcome of the race. I mention the housekeeping because even the tiniest foreign particle when building an engine, for example, and in a controlled environment, if it gets into the build of an engine, it can lead on to catastrophic failures. It's a proper team effort. That's why everyone needs to be rewarded and appreciated. No matter how small their individual roles are, it's probably the ultimate team sport. So Formula 1 is the most technically intensive sport in the world, and at times its equipment-centric nature tends to outweigh even driver talent. But that's what makes it cutting edge, as teams are free to develop the fastest possible cars on the planet within a set of rules and resources, and the team who has the fastest car and the fastest driver eventually win. And how do we say these are the fastest cars in the world? Well, apart from speeds of almost approaching 400 kilometers an hour, the cars can pull about 6.5 times the force of gravity, and which is quite a lot. And for example, on a fighter jet, they have G suits, and at 9G, a human being goes into unconsciousness. So it's pretty intense. Formula 1 is pretty intense. The best example, I should say, of how technically driven F1 is when you take the legendary Michael Schumacher. He was a 7-time world champion, and in 2006 he retired, but then he wanted to make a comeback, and he came back to the sport in 2010. Well, in the 3 years he drove between 2010 and 13, he drove for Mercedes, and he did not win a race in those 3 years. It's not that suddenly Michael Schumacher lost his talent. It was just that Formula 1 being such a equipment-centric sport, the Mercedes wasn't up to the job. But as you can see, any of you who follow Formula 1, their Mercedes is again a dominant force. So even the most talented drivers having the right equipment at your disposal is essential to being competitive in Formula 1. Also, Formula 1 is an active R&D lab for your everyday cars. The various technologies which we take for granted in your road cars, for example, the disc brakes, fuel injection systems, anti-lock braking systems, paddle shifts, turbochargers, were developed and fine-tuned for competition purposes before the technology, gets trickled down to your everyday road cars. Even the humble rear view mirror was used for the first time in competition in the Indy 500 in 1911, and the eventual winner, Ray Harun, was the first one to have used the rear view mirror, and yes. So, if you ask why a Formula 1 team employ 1,100 people and spend $400 million annually, that's your answer. It's an active research platform, and most of the technologies you find in your everyday road cars is from the Formula 1 background. Well, like any other sport, motor racing is all about being competitive. With Formula 1 being the pinnacle of motorsport, we are always working to find the smallest advantage, which keeps us ahead of the competition. To be a racing driver, having a competitive nature is a prerequisite. It is inherent, something that you need to be born with, and the intensity and the ferociousness increases many-fold as you move up the ladder. I learned this at a very early stage, that there is very little room at the top of the racing ladder. So ultimately, it's your mind that plays the deciding role when it comes to setting your own goals and beating the competition. The fact is, there is no easy ways out, there are no shortcuts, there are no quick fixes. If you want to reach the pinnacle of any discipline, it is a combination of perseverance, constant motivation, and even some luck, I would say. Being at the right place at the right time also matters. Most of you might have a source of motivation for anything that you'd like to achieve. Say you want to get in shape, you might have a benchmark like a famous personality who has a physique that you admire. But when you're already at the top or thereabouts, when you're looking for minor gains, that's when motivation has to come within. You have to be your biggest competitor and critic with blinding honesty. That's how you will be able to fine-tune your ability, which will give you the edge that you need to succeed. Well, what is ability? It is something you're born with, or is it something that can be developed? Well, I think it's a bit of both. Practice does make perfect, but there is no way you can make a rock float. Having that inherent talent is essential, but you can't expect to sail through if you don't put in the hours of hard work. Well, when I talk about teamwork, the most evident form of teamwork in my sport, Formula 1, is evident to spectators when you watch on television the races, is when the driver is in action during the 50 laps. But the fact that there are 200 to 300 people monitoring every input the driver makes from behind the scenes. However, the one place where a spectator can probably see teamwork involved in Formula 1 is during a pit stop. Basically, it is when you come into the pits during a race for a tire change and a fuel stop, a crew of upward of 20 people change 4 tires as quickly as possible. And as of today, the record stands at an incredible 2.3 seconds, and this is how it looks like. Wasn't that just beautiful? As you saw there, the entire pit crew knew exactly what needed to be done and made just the right amount of effort which enabled them to do their job in the simplest way. Being fast is good, but once again, consistency matters a lot for us. That's why every F1 pit crew aims and trains to be the best at what he does. Well, for us, in our everyday lives, 1 second is trivial. No one talks about getting things done in a second, right? None of us talk, except, holding on to the phone. I'll pass on the phone in a second. That's when we use, this phrase. But, in Formula 1, a second is literally a lifetime. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I told you earlier, there are many parallels between my sport and your profession. I would say teamwork, equipment, the split-second decisions you make, and so on and so forth. So I'm not the greatest public speaker in the world, but I'm here to, here to answer your questions later. But thanks for listening, and have a great event. And thank you very much. Thank you.